yeah, let's sit together for a little while. So taking your time again. So let your eyes come to close and settle into your seated posture. Seeing where the attention is naturally called. Being careful about any agenda that we're putting on our practice time together. Just remembering, just trying to be as present as we can with whatever experiences are arising, wherever they arise. And having those particular qualities of presence that lead towards understanding, kindness, wisdom, love, compassion, unbinding, releasing. And so, as always, we want to be careful about the kind of energy that we are bringing to this practice of observation. Careful that it be a quality that we want to cultivate. Something we might imagine wanting to always be present. And so we can see that that would not be an energy that's tight, that's enforcing, that's brittle, it's clinging. That actually the impulse to observe can come from a place of relaxation that is energized, that is maybe enthused, but not forceful. You can see how hard it is to not have a quality of mind that's impacting what's being observed. And so we also watch the repercussions of the impact of aversion or attachment when it's there on whatever we're observing in the body, in the mind, the sense experiences. So we just bring that sense of carefulness. As we bring the attention into more intentional relationship with the direct and fleeting experience of being. Maybe it is in the realm of sound. You may notice this range of sensory experiences coming and going. In sight, color, shape, motion, even with our eyes closed. Taste and smell. Not always, or maybe not usually upfront, but powerfully evocative when they are the primary object. Of course, the physical sensations of the body, throughout the body. Sometimes this terrain feels so vast. Other times you feel a sense of relief and the boundaried nature of physical experience in the body. There's not physicality outside of this fathom-long experience that we have to try to find or pay attention to. It's all just here, arising and passing on its own. Anywhere in this field, or as we often suggest, maybe in a more narrow bandwidth, where the hands are touching, or in the area around the abdomen, where the sensations of breathing can sometimes be noticed. Maybe subtly, maybe strongly, maybe clearly or not. We do tend to have some observable experience there in the abdomen. As the breathing moves on its own, rising and falling. And there is a way in which all of these, hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, in the realm of physicality, are all really part of body, right? Materiality. All these sensations really directly and inherently bound to the physical sensitivity of the body and its organs. Though, of course, we see the way in which sight and physical sensation still are quite different. Seeing is still direct result of the material experience of light making contact with the eye sensitivity. All sound, on the other hand, does have an experience that's often more directly physical. As these drums in our ear, so sensitive to the vibration of air. Frequencies that it receives through that medium physically. So we simply observe these phenomena on their own term, trying to stay connected to any experience that comes and goes on its own, changes, arises, passes, like the breath, or heat, or throbbing, pulsing. What is it to feel the relief of a smaller field of attention, like the breath, the hands touching, not a forced concentration, but a letting go of everything else. To honor, receive the fullness of each birth, life, and death of a breath. This commitment to stay with it through these changes. As we may watch the mind wander or squirm, start hunting for something more interesting, more satisfying. We watch the heart and mind. We watch it watching. We watch it searching. We watch it wanting, not wanting. And we can see that while it is intimately connected and tied to these realms of physicality, body-based senses, it is also of a different nature. Arising sometimes in response to physicality, but also in response to itself, a thought leading to a thought, an emotion leading to a wanting, an aversion to an imagining, totally disconnected at times. and the other sense experiences. But still of the same fundamental nature of changing, impermanent, coreless. And so we simply watch this interplay at times. Bringing the body-based sense experiences into our primary field of attention, but also totally open, interested, equally committed to watching the mind, heart, as it arises. This interplay between body, mind, mentality, and materiality. Not needing anything to happen, wanting to learn what is happening, what leads to what, how is all of this playing out, how does it work. We hold the mind, heart in equal reverence, whether we like what we see or don't. Into the body experience, the body-based senses, whether we like what we're feeling or not. Interested, committed, caring. I still haven't found a bell. I've seen, the only bells I've really seen are big, giant church bells. Uh, this is my charango, which is part of what I'm doing. Visiting family for a few weeks here in Ecuador, and then going to Bolivia for a while to first to just sit with my charango teacher for a week and practice a bunch, and then he's found a place for me to sit for a month out in the country, a little house. So I'll have a kind of self-retreat for a while, and travel a little bit in Bolivia, which I don't know at all, and then come back to Ecuador for a few more weeks, and I'm kind of bringing some of my family from the States back down, mostly some aunts and cousins, aunts who have never been back since they left when they were kids here, some cousins, a niece, my mom, so they can start to just kind of develop more kind of relationships with the place and with our family down here, where I've really been kind of the only one to mostly to sort of try to keep some of these connections going over the years. The talk today is a little bit of a not a normal Dharma talk, but something I feel like has been sort of cooking for me for a long time, and there's sort of like some sense of kind of congealing around something that I feel just worth sharing. Perhaps a little bit about. I I think I've only recently like identified this, like, I don't want to say concern, but like something I care about or that's worth caring about, that I care about, that I feel like is important, and it's sort of like related to some streams that have been important in my life for a long time, and um, there's a little more sense of like not of like one step forward. And it has to do with right now is like what I feel like the way it is congealing is a question around like what is and what will be the material culture of American Buddhism now and in 100 years, 500 years, or maybe even better to say like American Buddhisms, you know, like what are the material aspects of that, and creative, cultural um, dynamics, and what are the ways that the culture of um, the American Buddhisms, and I'd say that more than like Western Buddhisms, uh, like what are the responsibilities, what are the possibilities, what are the realities, um, and it just has felt really important. Um, Sorry, I'm gonna have things dinging. Um, because I don't think that is considered that much. I do think that like I think some American Zen traditions have a practice of, oh my God, sorry, there's like, I'm gonna have to turn something off. It's gonna bother me. In some Zen traditions, they have, the people sew their rakasus, the sort of um, uh, miniaturized symbol of a robe, that students, when people become formal students, often, in some of the traditions, will sew these material things, and and that in some of those traditions, um, there's more like actually quilting and sort of things that have kind of come out of that. In Hawaii, you see for sure, like a lot of the Japanese Buddhist traditions, for example, that have come out of Japan, people will still make mochis. Uh, there's still are like kind of foods and kind of cultural expressions, especially at certain holidays that are, um, part of the material culture, And I think that sometimes we kind of limit our conception of that to around kind of really trying to defend and promote the notion of dana, right? That's the material culture in terms of like the financial reality of Western Buddhism and our sort of responsibility that we feel to keep it really rooted in this culture of generosity and um, trying to manage that aspect of the material reality in terms of just the finances of how things operate and how things work and how are they sustainable and still aligned with the values that the Buddha really proposed and insisted upon. But there's also like this whole other level of material reality that humans over gazillion, right, 150,000 years, that doesn't seem, well, that is just not yet formed in terms of like what's happening in terms of Western Buddhism and what's the responsibility and what is it, what forms does it take, right? So it's like we may rely on our lineage in Burma, right? And we can go there and we see the carvings and the sculpture and the beautiful woodwork and the temples and the pagodas and this like sense of that there is this sense of craftsmanship and creation in that is inspired by the practice, that's inspired by the teachings, that's also trying to kind of instill and reinforce some of the teachings and some of the values, and that is also trying to really kind of reproduce some of those, right, to create the physical structures of Buddhism, and so that there is this, just as if, maybe not just as in, but as we observe mind and matter kind of bouncing off one another, propagating one another, there is something very that seems important. If you look at essentially any part of human history where there is an exchange, an interaction, a propulsion of forces between the spirit, the teachings, the ethereal sort of aspect of things, and the material reality of them. So some of that, of course, is money. Even in Burma, right? There's like there's hiring of workers, laborers to do, to build things, to construct things, and there's a sense of that the dana coming into monasteries is being used for part of that purpose. Actually, there's a responsibility to bring the community, to support the community in not just spiritual ways, but in material ways as well. Having spent some time this summer again in New Mexico, I mean, it's so powerful, right, to go and see more ancient material culture and the sense of, uh, ceramics and carvings and physical structures, right, that were created by indigenous people many, thousands of years ago, that there's an understanding that those are not outside of also like worldviews, right? And spirituality, right? That there's a sense of real like integration in those things. And an evolution, right? It's not static. There's like a movement, there's change over time that's adaptive to the material conditions that people face in terms of drought, in terms of war, in terms of all kinds of phenomena that happen in our worlds. But that also end up impacting the spiritual religious frameworks and understandings. It's not like these were the static things. These are always in motion in any time, any culture, anywhere. And I think I have seen some things that are more frustrating or disturbing or important and not acknowledged in terms of what is like the flavor of the material culture of a lot of American Buddhism, right? And especially when you think of, kind of more white, upper middle class, sort of like the IMS or we're always like the Spring in Santa Cruz. There's Insight Retreat Center, Spirit Rock. A lot of these bigger institutions that are like so important and so wonderful, and have given, like whatever happens in the next 100 to 500 years, we're like totally indebted to the fact of these institutions and the beautiful work and vision that has kind of gone into creating them. And they also have a certain quality of just aesthetic quality that is very specific. That's all, right? It's not. None of these places are colorful, for example, right? The color palette is like very narrow in terms of like the paint on the walls, and that is not inconsequential in terms of what that is reinforcing, what that's an expression of, and what it's reinforcing, and what it is what it generates, right? In terms of the implications of the cultural, creative reality, and what it's creating is important. And it's also to say that it's not the only thing, and that we don't have to associate like beige with Buddhism, right? Like those are not. There's nothing inherent about that, and that is there are a lot of good things about that. The relief from the sense volatility that we might come into. But that sense of like, oh, going to Vallecitos this summer, where it's like it's just different. It's not like it's not unproblematic in its own way, but it's like, oh, it's cabins, and it's just a different flavor, right? And then of course you go to Burma, or you go anywhere in Asia, and it's got like very different flavors depending on what country and culture and the experiences of that area. And so this question of like, this is something to be considered, just feels more important to me right now. Of like, if we don't have some sense of consciousness about it, and like a sense that we're responsible, and that we're responsible for exploring and experimenting, and like trying to figure out like what might be the things that we do that create culture, material culture, that is like something we're doing on purpose. Trying to align on purpose, and rather than something we just sort of slip into because it's kind of happening unconsciously in the background, or the place the where power is held around the decisions around this is something that we don't feel responsible for, we don't have access to, or whatever. um, I'll just share, and so this has come to life again for me a little bit here. um, I went to this amazing museum in Quito the other day, And it has an incredible collection of super old art. And I will show you some of it if I can remember how to share my screen. Here we go. So some of these pieces that I'll show are from, this is the Valdivia, what's called the Valdivia culture, which was like, between 3,000 and 6,000 years ago on the coast. And, oh, it's not gonna let me. Can I do this? It's some of the oldest art found in the Americas. Here you can see. So incredible. It's long enough ago that, they don't know what they may have called themselves, but this is a different people. Master potters. Again, this is more around like 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. It's the Chorrera culture. Amazing. If you remember, I told a story about an obsidian mirror in Mexico. This is what this is. Pre-Columbian yoga. So a small sense of just like totally amazing. And this sense of like beauty, and like this the ability to actually like create something materially, that feels meaningful, that is that is that is somehow, and of course, like, and especially from like a very materialistic perspective, like, culture is just the way we do things, and that it arises out of the way we produce, and so that you have a sense of people who were kind of early agricultural people with incredibly sophisticated practices, but who had to navigate a lot of the same things that we're navigating now, around the unpredictability of, let's just say, the weather or volcanic explosions and ash covering and the El Nino. And, there's incredible sense of like, how you can track here on the equator, right, which is where El Nino is kind of happening mostly, and La Nina sort of weather patterns out in the ocean. You can track so much of like the histories, like rise and falls of different civilizations based on these El Nino events and really hard droughts or really heavy rains. In the sense that people, created things that were designed to be aligned enough with the sort of spiritual forces at play to help either manage them or manipulate them or predict them, so that, crops could be grown and people could be healthy, and people could be healed from their sicknesses, and this, whether that the degree of that's playing out in the material realm versus the spiritual realm is like not necessarily so divided, as maybe is generally experienced this day and age. And that there's something, this sense of just like there's something so lost in our common inability to like craft and like create things, that are expressions of our material reality, And again, from the more sort of like, materialist perspective, it's not like you can't just kind of come up with these things. That you can't just make up culture, that it has to, that it's rooted in something more material. It's rooted in a kind of material need and kind of realities. But I also think that it's important to see that it's not like, it still has like a manifold, uh, expressions, right, across the planet of like how that might happen, even in similar material circumstances that humans may find themselves in, the different expressions around like everyday usage, around bowls and plates and spoons and water jugs, to things that are more ceremonial, more intended for um, kind of spiritual or shamanistic use. I'm going to show you another cool couple jugs. Hold on. How cool is that? Uh, a lot of these pelican. A lot of these are made with certain kind of air internally. There's little systems of kind of airflow so that when you pour it, it actually makes a sound that's represents the animal itself. Mm. And then today and so you have these like ancient like traditions and cultures, and um, you know it's not like people are making these anymore of any tradition or culture, you know what I mean? Or if they are, it's more for sale, right, as kind of reproductions or whatever. Like the this is not in common usage, right, in any cultural context, right? This capacity for this level of like pottery making. It's like people are relearning and reinstilling it, and trying, bringing back in the same way that's happened in like the Southwest in the United States, or like people have really kept a lot of these things alive. And yet, of course, it's not necessarily always for in the same cultural context as which they might have been used 1,000 years ago, right? Um, they're artworks, and they're for sale in that way. And just to say, it's like another. So today, I went to another place, um, a little further north towards where, in the province where my grandfather was from, toward a town called Ibarra. There's a place called Zuleta, and they're famous for their embroidery. So they do all this just like amazing embroidery work. Um, and and it was interesting. I was talking to a few of the folks there who were selling their mm, selling their pieces. And amazing, it's like this is not actually an ancient thing, right? This part of the province was divided by two giant haciendas that had, these padrones, the owners of the hacienda, and those folks basically made the Indian people learn how to do embroidery for them, right, for their homes and for their needs. And these Quechua speaking folks were saying like, yeah, it was like it was part of our incredibly oppressive working conditions, is that we not only had to work the land, but that we had to make all this stuff for them for, essentially nothing. And now we're independent of that, right? And we're free from the haciendas, but we still have the skill, have this, incredible craft that we have like has integrated into the culture. But now we can ask for an appropriate price for our work, and that there's something like really liberating in that, um, and empowering and beautiful, right? So it's like a collective, and it's all of the things that you would sort of hope for, right? That the community has like a sort of sense of shared um, momentum and inspiration to move to use these skills and crafts in a way that are helping raise everyone into a better standard of living, and have more infrastructure in their community and all of the things that you can imagine any community would want. And so you do have this, you see in the Inuit communities up way north in Canada, folks who printmaking was not like some ancient tradition, right? But at some point, I think it was in the 60s, where this kind of came in as like a notion, right, of like, could we be doing printmaking? And now there's just like these incredible printmakers, right? All the Cape Dorset and northern people up there making just like incredible art, that is still rooted culturally in their experience, that has kind of imagery and story experience that is ancient, but it takes on a new form. So it's just to say that it's like there is not some sense that like we don't also have possibilities for what that might look like. And so mostly I feel like I just want to that it feels important. It feels important to consider, right, for all of us, of like, what are the things that we may do in our lives that may be a craft, that may be, there's some form of creativity. We'll just leave it at sort of that, whether it's like painting or quilting or art or music or something like that, that we have had as a part of our lives that we value, um, that may not be something that comes explicitly from Buddhist tradition. It may not be something that we can easily reconcile necessarily at this point with our Buddhist practice, with Vipassana practice, but that it's like, why not consider what that is, right? And not just on the, and I guess to be careful too, right? Where there's often this sense of like, oh, well, you can get into the mishmash of things that are artistic are spiritual, and my practice is spiritual, and it's just sort of like that it's all the same. Versus like maybe more considered of like, well, where are the places where it feels like it can be synchronized, where there's something that feels, or writing or whatever, like that it feels like this is part of my spiritual path, where it feels like there are contradictions, and to be honest about those things, and to be willing to explore them as that, and not just our creative aspect, but our work, right? I mean, if we think about the Eightfold Path and livelihood, it's like, where it's, we're something, we might have an identity in terms of a certain occupation, and it's like, what does that mean to be doing that as someone who is also a practitioner, right? Someone who's also trying to untangle from greed, hatred, and delusion. What are the ways in which like we take responsibility for the volitional force of action, of creation, whether it's material creation or the creation of some momentum in the world through our professional, through our social conduct in whatever way. Like, what are the ways that we are like taking that seriously as not a question so much of as identity, as like, well, what does it mean to do this as a Buddhist? But that is not an unhelpful way of framing it at times, right? Which is to say, it's like, where it might it be helpful to ourselves to explore like the act of creation, of generating, right, and of doing, that is not explicitly just Vipassana, right? It's not just like meditation. It's not just the observation piece of it, but it's the more active part of it. It's the part of it that has to do with our role in the world. And it's not just a matter of like, often we'll focus on, of course, kindness and generosity and the Brahma Viharas, for example, or patience, some of the paramis, the 10 perfections. Of course, all of that, because that's what we teach mostly when we're teaching about our expression in the world. But there is this other question around like the material aspect of our actions, and what ways do we take that as a part of our own spiritual practice, and where do we start to see that as like part of our responsibility for whatever this lineage, this tradition becomes, like far beyond us, and that like we may not, our thing may not be the thing that ends up being like what Buddhists do in 100 years, right? Or when people are digging up our dirt, and they're like, wow, look at these guys all did watercolors or whatever, it's like it may not be the thing, but it doesn't mean that we can't explore within our expressions of it, and that there's not a sense of like an importance of doing that in order to be able to try to figure some of this out. And so, for me, it's like I've talked for folks who have, been with us for a while, I've talked in the past about like spoon carving as something that I do and I learn lessons from. And it's always been something that I haven't always felt like totally clear on if it had a place in this realm, right? And like teaching. So, but I know some folks, a couple of years ago, I did a spoon carving online workshop with the Center for Whole Communities. And so some folks, from our Vipassana world kind of joined that, and which was super fun. And I think it's like, it's just taken this long to feel, for me to sort of understand, like, what is it? How does that fit in? Because it's not the same as Vipassana, but it's also like Vipassana or whatever we're doing, whatever we're creating is more, there's something beyond our own practice that is also important, that is like a momentum in the world that has value and will actually have value in terms of like what we're generating and what is being inherited in terms of what's next, that it's not, and maybe part of the priority is because Zoom has become such a big part of our reality in terms of teaching, where it's like, wow, it's so wonderful and we're so grateful and we're going to continue. And it's like, it's very disembodied in a certain way, right? It's such a like a hilarious aspect of the material culture of like how immaterial some aspect of this is, not that we aren't all in our bodies wherever we are. Anyways, it's just to say that I do want to this spring try to start offering something in our own Vipassana Hawaii context around, I'm thinking more bowl carving than spoon carving. And I can't quite say why that feels more important. Because I guess I can say there's something about bowls, and this is from all of my travels and all of my, whether it's museums or just like eating, there is something about a bowl that is so powerful and that does have a precedent in our own lineage, right, around begging bowls, that monks and nuns have and have had for several millennia. That I do want to start offering some kind of online, maybe a 6-week thing where we get together once a week for 6 weeks, whoever's interested, and we get folks to have whatever, the tools you need and the kind of materials you need in order to learn how to do this one thing that I kind of know how to do, and to explore that, right? It's to say that like bowl carving is going to be what we are going to instill in American Buddhism, right, for the generations. It's more like, here is a thing, and it's beautiful, and there are ways that I have learned it, and there are ways that I think it can be deepened, right, that are not going to be Vipassana practice, but they are going to be about what are the ethics and the values that we have in our tradition, in our practice, that can also be instilled in a material act. in a material practice, in a cultural practice, as we're creating culture and as we are creating a material culture, what is it to create a bowl that you know you're not going to sell, right? That you're either going to use it or that you're going to give it away, right? What are the things that we might learn about patience, about generosity, about any number of things, right? In terms of the Brahma Viharas, in terms of the uh, Eightfold Path, in terms of the Noble Truths. How does the creation of something like a bowl, a simple wooden bowl, um, give us an opportunity to explore the ways in which we might be instilling these values, instilling these beliefs, these insights, these truths in a material way, in which an object can then be used as an expression of that, a transmission of that, a way that we reinforce that for ourselves or for others. So I don't have it all sorted, but it's feeling more clear that it's something that I want to be able to offer alongside of our kind of traditional kind of spectrum of offerings, because I do feel like it's important to consider, and that it's an important thing for us to be thinking about as something we have responsibility for, and that there's a possibility of actually creating something really beautiful and a way to instill that, and a way to produce and to manifest some of these things that we're developing in our lives, and in the world, and in our expression of our path. And to say that that is not a requisite. We still have such a beautiful lineage and honoring of people who like go sit in a cave for 50 years and like you don't need to produce anything. And like that's, thank goodness, right, that there have been people doing that for the last 2,500 years, and we will support anyone who wants to do some version of that, up to like, I don't need to do that, but I also don't want to carve a bowl. Like, don't worry about that. This isn't like a now everyone will carve bowl. But it's like, but to still consider, like, what are the things that you are doing or would like to do, the things that you would like to learn, and might feel like it's frivolous, or might feel like you don't have time, or what have you. But to see the sense of like, no, there is an exploration in this process that is important. It's maybe not the sort of essence of your practice. It might not be the essence of what we're teaching in terms of the liberatory power of insight, but that it's not nothing, and that there might be something actually quite important about it in terms of what we are creating for those who come, after us, and how those might be things that we also feel our practices, our tools, our methods, and our material expressions of what we're trying to do together. Because if we don't, it's going to happen anyway, and it's going to happen unconsciously, or it's going to happen through forces, expressions that we might not feel so good about, might not feel good. I won't share at this point all of the pictures I've taken from all of the churches I've been to at this point, because it's like there's some, after having been to Spain a couple of years ago, there is something it's so much more fire and blood in the Catholic churches here than you even see over there, right? It's like the material expression, that side of the material expression is so intense. You have the other side of like the Virgin Mary, which is like so much of it's so exquisite, right? And so beautiful, and the craftsmanship is like so inspiring, right? And then you have like, my father, he he moved from here when he was 5, right, to the United States with his parents, my grandparents, and so he didn't have a ton of memories, of Ecuador. Um, uh, and he did come to visit, and that's part of why I have a connection, is this sense of like, we rebuilt some of those relationships. But he said one of the very few memories he had here was of a church that I went to the other day, where there's just this enormous painting of hell and all of the different kinds of sin and all of the punishments that are people are subjected to for doing this or for doing that, and this giant Lucifer in the center of it, demonic thing. And it was like this horrifying memory, right? It's like his one of his like earliest memories is this painting of just like horror and terror, of like, this is what's going to happen to you if you do any of these things. And it's in the most beautiful church I've ever been in, La Compañía Church, and it's like unbelievably gorgeous. And then there's this painting, and it's like it's like it's complicated on many levels. All of the stuff is complicated. I'm sure, these things I showed you from 6,000 years ago, we don't know how complicated they were in the era that they were being built, right? But they were complicated to 100% sure, right? Um, but this sense of like, this happens, this is going to happen. There's always a material expression of any system of belief, of practice, of any sort of like cultural phenomena that starts to arise. And where do we take it seriously? Where do we take responsibility for it? Where do we keep it something human and at a human level? And that's something that is we are taking responsibility for the values that it are instilled in it, the values that it encourages, the values that it inspires, and the values that it tries to reproduce in ourselves and in the world. Especially as there's more consumerism, especially as there's more technology, more war, more violence, less connection to our physical bodies. What might be the things that we do that are taking responsibility for the ways in which our material world aligns with our values. And this might be small symbolic things, but to trust that has momentum, that there's something real in that. Yeah. So I don't think I'll take questions today, but I look forward to next week. Next Sunday, I'll be in Sucre, Bolivia, just getting there, and Michelle hopefully will be all healed up, raring to go. She is doing better, but we know other folks who have gotten this flu, and it's like, sounds like it's a solid 10 days of being pretty wiped out. So she is thankfully taking care of herself and has other folks taking care of her as well. So she sends her metta and is, of course, really grateful to receive all of the care from you all. Yeah. Okay, take care, everybody. So aloha.